Welcome, everybody. So it's really a pleasure here to gather. I'm Ashley Wazana. I'm a director of the psychosocial access of the department, the Research Institute, and also the research department of the Department of Psychiatry here at the Jewish. And it's really a pleasure to be able to celebrate today the work of Catherine, and who had a pleasure to meet. But not with the extensive richness of knowledge and collaborations and friendships I know we're going to have a chance to hear about for today. So it'll be a pleasure really to hear so much more about her. She was an associate professor in the Department of Psychiatry at McGill and a professor in psychology department at Dawson, and a clinical psychologist and a researcher with the behavioral psychotherapy and research unit at the JGH. And at the JJH, she collaborated with Eva Libman, with Laura Creddy, with Sally Bales on research into sleep and insomnia, among others. We'll have an extensive list. I thought 6 speakers, we have 9 speakers. So, and I'm sure, maybe other spontaneous testimonies. So their work really reflected the essence of translational research, integrating the research directly into clinical care and teaching, which was really something I advocated for at length, and the importance of that lab in our hospital. Catherine was also co-director of the Adaptive Tech Research Network, which is a bilingual multidisciplinary research team focused on higher education and disability. I don't know much about this. I look forward to hearing about it today, but it studied factors that contribute to the success of college and university students with disabilities with a focus on technologies. And they developed a toolkit to support students with disabilities. Going to hear about this. And she engaged in international research collaborations, which is always a sign of how one sort of reaches out in the international community, and the rayonnement for scholars from Israel, the UK, US, Germany, Belgium, and actively involved in organizing academic conferences and receiving several awards, including Psychological Association for distinguished contributions to the public community services. So published extensively in both English and French, collaborating with colleagues and students, produced 40 papers in the past 4 years alone, and simultaneously holding over $7 million in research grants from provincial and federal agencies. So she's a brilliant researcher who made significant contributions not only to the field of psychology, but adaptive technologies, success of students, and to the study of sleep medicine. And her insights and passionate dedication to her students were inspiring. Her care, compassion, commitment to create an inclusive environment was a really great example for our department. So, and I just relish the contribution because she was there always at our round. She always had a word, a question to say, kind and curious. And so I'm just happy that we can celebrate her legacy today with all the speakers, starting with William Brender. And there are a few of us right now. I think just we are about online. There are about 15 other people who are with us online. Yeah. And just if you're speaking from here, you don't need a mic. If you do walk away, stray away from the podium, you can use this. Not wandering.
So I'd like to add my thanks to everyone who's come today for this little talk. I also think Ashley Wazana is deserving of thanks for his really nice summary of portrait of Kathy's life. It was very thorough, very detailed, and very well done. Thank you very much. The team is grateful. So this meeting, as you know and can see, is in honor of a cherished colleague, Kathy Fitchen, who died last fall. I just want to highlight a couple things that Ashley said, in particular, in his summary of Kathy's career. He made reference to the amount of respect colleagues felt for Kathy, and the affection as well that always everyone felt for her. I first met Kathy, would you believe, in late 70s. She came to do a CBT internship with me, and there she met Eva Libman, who you're going to hear from soon. Eva had just completed the previous year, a year-long internship in CBT as well. They liked each other from the first time they met, and they began a collaboration that went more than 45 years. I think they've got that right. In the late 80s, we were able to add a few more clinician researchers, Laura Cretty, Sally Bales, and a little bit later, Dory. When did you come, Dory? 20? Oh my God. I was going to guess 12 by half. I'd also be remiss if I failed to mention that in addition to this team, Kathy's mother and father were involved in Kathy's research. Why? Because sometimes there was a shortage of funds. It was difficult to find research assistants, and Kathy's parents, loving as they were, wouldn't hesitate to join and offer whatever clerical assistance they could provide. So I think it's only fair that we mention her as well. He's gonna show up, and her dad is gonna show up on a slide or two. Kathy's parents were very proud of her and her career, and had a lot of respect for her work. And I think that she reciprocated in their old age by being very attentive to them. She was a very devoted daughter. In addition to Kathy's appetite for research and publication, she was an admirable clinician, as many of us know. She was generous and caring with her patients and put serious thought into their treatment. If a client reached out to her after, say, a 20-year gap, they were confident she would make time for them, as she always had. Notice that we're talking here about short-term CBT. Among Kathy's priorities, she was invested in the development of students and young psychologists, particularly women whose careers could be more intricate due to conflicting demands on them. She was a conscientious mentor, and many young psychologists are indebted to her. Last, I'd like to mention a quality of Kathy's that I cherished. She was refreshingly unconventional. She had a couple of quirks. She loved and was very loyal to her friends, while at the same time she was rather shy and private as a person. Self-disclosure was just not her thing. She didn't much bother with conventional social rules that consumed many women's valuable time, like duties of hospitality. I think I remember her telling me once, "Bill, don't look in my fridge. You might be shocked. There's nothing in them. The fridge is always empty." So to sum up, we all felt that personally and professionally, Kathy was a treasure. We are frankly wounded by her loss. We are left with the dismal task to be grateful for our time together, which was considerable, but still, it every moment counted. Thanks. Eve is gonna pick up the thread from here and talk a little bit about sexuality research.
So, you know, William Brender does represent the beginning of Catherine's research voyage here at the Jewish General, and so it was certainly fitting that he started this celebration. Catherine and I do have a very long history. We both wanted to study with Bill Brender, who was at that time known as an expert in the relatively new field of CBT, cognitive behavior therapy. And so I came first to train with him, and Kathy came a little bit later. I think I need to explain a little about the nautical theme here. It's a bit unusual. We've used it as the more traditional kind of roadmap. And we needed a bit of a roadmap because here, with our team at the JGH, we did kind of go through various decades of a different kind of a transition to a different program. I think that was different. That was not the same at Dawson, where there was at least there was one theme all the way through. So we have the nautical theme because Kathy and Jake are both avid sailors, and certainly Kathy, if there was any kind of a work-related assignment that came up and that happened to conflict with a scheduled sailing race, there was no contest. I mean, she was off on the water. So therefore, we thought it was appropriate and evocative to have the sailboats as part of the memory. So at the time that we both came, Kathy and I, we wanted to learn about CBT, which was relatively new in those days, in the mists of time. And but Bill at that time was interested in sexual dysfunction. He was applying. Sorry, I need to get my glasses so that I don't know, so that I see where I'm going. He was interested in applying the principles and practice of CBT to the diagnosis and treatment of sexual problems. In those years, it was called sexual dysfunction. We were the sexual dysfunction service, and that was a name that kind of dogged our lives for years after we did, we explored other avenues as well. Notably, that the 80s were also the decade, it was the third decade of Masters and Johnson, and their groundbreaking studies in human sexuality. So, and their program was really quite CBT oriented. And in fact, to this day, it forms the basis of modern day sex therapy. So this is the context in which Kathy and I win any popularity contests in those days because in the Department of Psychiatry, they were pretty staunchly psychoanalytic, but I guess we all survived. From the beginning, Kathy modeled a style of quickly turning data into manuscripts to be submitted for publication. And sometimes she even, if we had enough data and the N was big enough that sometimes even in the middle of a study, she got interested in something, and lo and behold, there was a draft there ready to be edited and be submitted. So that was something that that energy that she introduced into our lives. The other thing that she did for us was, in those days, we were obliged to write this humongous report that can run to 100 pages before we got the last installment of our funding money. So this was something that we all dreaded, and I thought that probably after doing all that work and sorting all those impossible number of pieces of paper, because this was the era of paper, that it was just going to go on some government related shelf and gather dust for eternity. I really didn't see the point of this, but Kathy pointed out that this was a gold mine for information and completely processed studies that could be elicited from this big report. So yeah, so then we saw, well, maybe it all was useful for something. I think that the particular focus that Kathy had was evident in both, in the parallel journeys along the river with even though we were separate. The programs of the research programs were separate at the JGH team and the Dawson team, but there was some thread, a common theme that she was particularly interested in, the cognitive focus, she had a style, and I think it all stemmed from her very strong interest in finding out what is it that works in therapy? What is it in the therapy? What components work, and and how do you measure it? And this all, I think, stemmed from her experience as a teacher, a very dedicated teacher of students, and she was very much committed to the students, their success, how they would succeed, particularly the ones with disability, that they succeed and they graduate and go successfully into the world. And I think that attitude was evident in the research that she did with us too. So she did, even when she worked with us, she published in a more cognitive journal often, because that's where her interest lay. And in the sexual dysfunction field, and publishing in the journal that we usually did, the Journal of Sex and Marital, she did do a paper like Attributions for Sexual Dysfunction. And by the way, the result of that study was that if you had a couple, they each blamed the one partner who had the problem. And and that was and that it didn't matter what the situation was, what other possibilities there were in terms of environment. It was the partner that had the problem, he or she was to blame, which was interesting. A secondary result of that study was that the people who were in the happier marital situation, they tended to the greater the self blame, the lower the partner blame. The better the quality of the marital relationship. It changed it changed the intensity of the blame, but the direction was always there. Then we went into a bunch of studies that had to do with sexual consequences of surgeries like prostatectomy and inguinal hernia repair that we did with the students. And so there were a few of them, a series of those. And at the end of that run of impact of surgery on sexual adaptation, Kathy's professorial bent again came to the fore, and she and I worked on 2 behavioral guides for information about the prostate and its problems. And oh, no, sorry. Okay, I can't find the second one, but there were 2. One was about an informational one, and one was about good sex after prostatectomy. So we wanted to make everybody happy, particularly the men and their sex lives. Now, by then we were coming to the end of the 80s, and by that time, the funding agencies seemed to have completely lost interest in sexuality and research on sexuality. So we did have to change course, and which we did. And that will come a little bit later, but after this, the next presentation will be longtime representatives of the Dawson research field, and they also had a very long relationship with Catherine. So Alice and Susie, whatever order you plan to come.
Those who know me know I talk a lot, so somebody keeping track of time, please. If you give me 10 minutes, give me the high sign and then I'll wrap up. Thank you. Drag me off. First of all, for those who don't know me, my name is Alice Havel. Longtime Dawson person, worked in the Accessibility Center at Dawson. And while I was doing that, Catherine somehow got me involved in research, which I had no interest in doing research, but it's hard to say no to Catherine. And it was a really good experience. I retired from Dawson in 2014 and had totally lost my identity. And Catherine talked me into becoming a researcher. So she helped me reinvent myself. And now I can proudly say that I feel a little bit more comfortable in that role. And being in a more kind of hospital academic setting, when we were preparing our presentation, we really tried to focus on research because we figured that's what you would want to hear about. But we have lots of other personal stories about Catherine as well. I'd like to thank you for giving the opportunity to, we call it the other family. We have the family at the Jewish, and she had this other family she was raising on the side, and we were the AdaptTech group. So we really appreciate you giving us the opportunity. One of the things I note, many of you call her Kathy. We always called her Catherine, and we haven't moved slides yet. Thank you. So one of the things, the first slide here lists so many researchers and students and research staff. You'll recognize some names. Some are sitting here in the audience. Vicki, you're right at the top of the list there. And what I want to stress, it's in no specific order, not chronological, not by importance, and we've probably left people off the list. And it's because the impact was so vast, we really couldn't recall everyone. Sally, who I have to give you credit for this nautical theme, put an anchor in for the Adapt Tech, because that's sort of where we rooted ourselves on that long journey of research. Those of you who are looking at the slide will definitely recognize Catherine in a younger version. How many of you recognize the building at the bottom? Yeah, we have some Selby people here. And Catherine actually started at Selby campus in 1969. Dawson was opening, and we were in a drug factory. Yeah. And Catherine had just finished her master's degree and started working there. So that was her beginning. Now, I had to go through her CV, which was pages and pages, and find out what the real early research was. And I can't bluff some of it here, because the first one was the effects of retest examination procedures. And Catherine worked with Lillian Fox on that project, who was sitting here in the audience. So if I'm not saying things correctly, you can correct me. But basically what they found was, and to great surprise, was that students actually, if they had that retest opportunity and they could prepare for it, they were able to actually learn more and remember more. And also tied in with that was they were less anxious. And, we say, oh yeah, that's kind of obvious. But think of it, 50 years ago, a teacher talking about retesting, about having a second opportunity, that was like unheard of. But that was Catherine. She wanted to make sure that students had the best opportunity. Now, those of you who are from the psych department also remember Betty Sutherton. And Betty and Catherine did a study on, are horoscopes really true? Now, I have never heard Catherine talk about horoscopes, unless you know something I don't know, Jake. I don't think she was particularly interested in horoscopes, but she knew students were interested in horoscopes. And she wanted to teach them the scientific method of research in psychology. And what better way than to find a topic that they were interested in? And again, the findings were kind of like, oh, really? Women read horoscopes more than men. And that really there wasn't a lot to be found out in terms of horoscopes, because they were really not all that reliable. But from that exercise, she developed a lab manual for other teachers so they could conduct experiments in their psychology classes. And that was the value of all of that. Then she went on, and I don't know if you know anything about these psych teachers here. Faculty perceptions of administrative decisions at Dawson College. Well, you know what that sounds like? We're not really happy, and we have something we want you to tell you as administrators, but we're going to do this scientifically. And she actually published that. So I have no idea what the discontent was in the early 80s, but there was obviously some discontent there. In 1985, she published an article in a journal called Perspectives, which was part of the AQPC. That was a group of professors in CEGEPs. And it was all about doing research at the CEGEP level. And the theme was basically, there was no resources, there was no money, you were on your own, do it yourself. And teachers were still expected, and you notice I'm saying teachers, not professors, because they were seen as teachers and they were expected to teach 5 courses a semester. Didn't leave you a lot of time to do research. Now, if I remember correctly, going back to the colleagues here, there was a story, another colleague just walked in. There was talk, I think, Lillian, that you guys worked one summer in VJ campus doing data collection and manipulation. And she said the worst part was the cafeteria was closed. So you couldn't even get anything to eat while you were working on all this research. That's where she certainly talked about her mother doing typing for her father meeting focus group participants and, you know, reading them in there. I'm sure that there was also some baking going on to serve, you know, cookies and coffee while people were around. But she really did it all with nothing. And then there was a change where people started to be eligible in the CEGEPs for monies from SSHRC, FRQSC, etc. And Catherine said that was a big help, but it really didn't address all the problems. One of the major problems was that teachers still had very large teaching loads. So, you know, research was on top of that. Yes, she was able to get release time with some of that funding, and that made a really big difference. There was still no space. I mean, even our final years in AdaptTech, we had an office that was so small. We knew when we had new cleaners because they never emptied the garbage cans in AdaptTech because they thought we were a closet. We had a 0 number tucked in behind an elevator. So Catherine just made it work. And what she figured out was how to fill out those damn applications. She had it down to an art. And we would look at her and say, really, Catherine, you're going to be able to sell this? And she'd say, yeah, because we get 35 points for that. And I've covered all those bases. Oh, we're a little weak here, but it's only 10 points worth. So she figured out how to get money for research. It still didn't address all the difficulties that were there, but she also was able to get a critical mass of grants. And with that critical mass of grants, you were able to start moving things around and you could afford a research assistant, you know, 3 or 4 days a week. You couldn't do that on one grant. So she really, really committed to research and made it work at the CEGEP level. One of the first major research, and I think it was mentioned by somebody, I think Bill, you mentioned it, if I'm not mistaken, or Eve, I can't remember, short-term memory loss, that she was really concerned about the interaction of students with disabilities and their peers. And part of that stemmed from, she talked about when her father was first using a wheelchair. She found that people really responded differently to him. You know, they, not always in a positive way. And so she was starting to wonder about what it was like for students with visible disabilities. And what she found out, she looked at one variable, which was novelty. And novelty was that idea of if this was something new that you hadn't experienced before, interacting with an individual with disability, would that somehow affect your attitude? And what she found out was yes, that the people who were more open to novel experiences, in fact, responded better to individuals with disabilities. But she translated that into two really important she always looked at what are the implications of this research. One implication was that concept of integration. We grew up, there were no students with disabilities in our classrooms. They were spent on that little bus to a different school. If you started to integrate students with disabilities who were academically capable, it wasn't a novel experience anymore. So it was a great, great argument for integration. And the other thing is she had a message to the students with disabilities. Other students are fearful of you because you are novel. You have to make the effort to introduce yourself. And if you do that, they will respond in kind. And that is in fact what happened. She even, I think, did a manual at one time, again, because she loved those manuals, a manual to help students integrate. AdaptTech Research Network, our baby. Catherine established that in 1996, along with Jennison Asuncion as the co-director. People somehow thought that it was part of Dawson and that Dawson funded it. No way. It was located at Dawson. They gave us telephones, they gave us this little office, but Catherine had to raise all the funds through research to make AdaptTech work. And as was already mentioned, there was a lot of researchers, international, both CEGEP and university, right across Canada, as well as all the countries that were mentioned. It wasn't just also faculty. She brought in people like Susie and myself, who were service provider. One of her last research was done with a librarian doing a review of a topic. So she brought in anybody she can find if they had some connection. She was wonderful about finding out that research link. The research participants, obviously her first interest and desire was to get feedback from as many students with disabilities as she could. Again, English and French, and she expanded that notion of disabilities beyond visible disabilities, but students with mental health issues, learning disabilities. And near the end, she was just plain interested in students. And she was pretty sure that we all had some special needs, whether they were obvious or not, whether they were health related or not. And she just wanted to know more about people. And the focus is on information and computer technologies, particularly at the beginning. That's why, if you haven't figured out yet, adapt tech, because she was looking at adaptive technology. And in her looking at adaptive technology, she found out that much of the computer technology and the software that was in the colleges was not accessible for students with disabilities. They needed adaptive technologies in those days. And that was a problem because although the college could fund those technologies, they weren't portable. So the student went home and they had nothing. And if they purchased it on their own, it was really expensive. And most students weren't aware that there were, in fact, government grants that they could apply for. But she learned, again, what was the lesson she learned from this? There was a couple of things she learned. She learned that students had figured out that one technology that a friend was using, in fact, also worked for them. So we think of screen readers, the text to voice for a student that's visually impaired. But in fact, students with dyslexia, with learning disabilities said, hey, that works well for me. So they were starting to exchange information. She also found that we were part of the research as service providers, and we told her what we thought students should be using because we knew best, right? She then asked the students, what are you using? And they said, we don't use that. First of all, they said, if I use it, I look different from everybody else. So if I have this monocular and I'm sitting there in the front row, then everybody's staring at me. But if I have another way of accessing those material on the board without, now they use their cell phones, they just looked like they integrated better and they felt better, and it actually worked better for them. And there was a very clear message there for us was, if you really want to know, ask the student. And that's why she felt it was so important to integrate students in her research. Okay, this study, students with and without disabilities at Dawson College graduate at the same rate. I belong to ResearchGate, and they keep telling you every day how many people have downloaded this article and how many people have looked at it. And actually, that was probably the most cited research that she ever did. And there's a couple of reasons for it. She worked with a colleague. I don't know if you guys remember Shirley Jorgensen. Shirley was institutional research. And Shirley was at the Memorial at Dawson, and she said, I'm sitting in my office, this lady comes in, she saw institutional research, and she said, this has got to be somebody who's going to be an ally because she does research. And they did an archival study. 41,000 students without disabilities, 41,000 student records they looked at, compared with 653 students who at that time had been registered in the services for students with disabilities. And that was a 12-year period. And what she found out was that students without and without disabilities graduated the same percentage rate. So, 60 some odd percent of students graduated, it would be both students with and without disabilities. That the average grades in the first semester, there was no difference. And she looked at first semester because, again, research showed if you make it through first semester, you'll make it through CEGEP. And she looked at the course pass rates. So basically, she started to say, these students are performing equally. And the only difference was it took students with disabilities 1 semester longer, which is no big deal. And it's basically because they did a reduced course load. So again, really interesting findings. What did she do with those findings? I'm just going to show you one more slide that shows that before I go on. So looking at the slides, and Catherine loved PowerPoints that had charts and diagrams and whatever, and they had to be formatted and clear. So this is a pretty clear chart. If you look at it, it says we have students in social science, in technical programs, and then all the other programs that are not social science or technical. And if you look at the grades, if you looked at students without disabilities at the far right, for example, in social science, they were graduating with grades of an average of 62%, not stellar. If you looked at students with all other disabilities except for learning disabilities, they had the highest grades. Why does this matter? Because people still cite the study about why it's worthwhile for students with disabilities to attend post-secondary education. Because it was quite a fight at the beginning, what are they doing here? They're not going to be going out to work. Are you sure they're capable? They've been in special schools. Why are we taking them? And Catherine said, it's worth every penny. And they're doing even better. And so one of the things she said, you could talk about, individual case studies, but with administrators, they wanted hardcore data. And that's what she gave them. And that's also what's being used today with people when they're trying to advocate for what's happening and why we should be putting resources there. And I think that's my end. And Susie's on board next.
So, hello, everybody. I'm Susie Weilman. I worked at Dawson for many years. Alice recruited me to work with her in the Accessibility Center. Before that, I was in the counseling department. And once I got lured into the Accessibility Center, it was because I volunteered, by the way, but that's another story. I'll tell you another day. I started to see that Alice was also involved with funny little tasks around research, and you'd be distributing questionnaires or trying to get students involved. And slowly I became involved also with the research at the AdTech Research Institute. So one of the things that AdaptTech did, and we are known well for, is this database called FANDI. And FANDI is simply free and inexpensive. And what that was about, that was sorry. There we go. Am I in the right place? Yes, I am. Okay. And that was motivated by Catherine's interest in allowing students who needed to have access to inclusive, any kind of inclusive technology that we could provide was, okay, so what's out there? And so that's what we did. So it evolved from some of the studies that she did on technology, because again, with Catherine, you had somebody, and those of you who've worked with her, incredibly curious person. She always wanted to ask questions. She wanted to know what worked for people. And she wanted to find out if something didn't work, why didn't it work? So what can we do to make it work? So I think that's really the how FANDI evolved. It started with lists that we created in AdaptTech about the technology, following these questions that Catherine was interested. And she saw students as the logical experts in their use of these technologies. So not the people like Alice and I who worked for the Accessibility Center, and certainly not their teachers, even though Catherine herself was a teacher. So she asked the right questions to the right groups, and that business about including the stakeholders. And in disability circles, we call this philosophy, nothing about us without us. That notion that we have to think about policies, and we have to think about inclusive tech, in this case, from the words of the experts, those that are using it. So that's how it evolved. From 99 to 2001, we did research into ICTs and students with disabilities, and that showed that there were general use and lower cost applications that could be used. There were alternatives. And then from around 2012, we looked at ICTs and students with disabilities, specifically with learning disabilities, because the students with learning disabilities, a lot of them had difficulty accessing text. So what we wanted was something that would be text friendly. And the stuff that existed was, as Alice mentioned, incredibly expensive that we had in our service. But, you know, if only one person could use it at a time, could use a screen reader at a time, it was fairly limited. So that's how that started, okay, that this list generated by students that then became the database. And that database has a lot of things that Catherine got involved in. That database grew. It kind of came, it came into its life on its own, really, a life of its own. So then Catherine looked, and this covers a lot of years, actually, from 2001 to 2019. She was starting to think about, okay, so how do teachers use technology in the classroom? Because we always had students and students with disabilities in our research group, and we would hear them complaining, or sometimes not complaining, but often complaining about how their teachers were using or were not using technology in the classroom. So we did a study, and Adaptec did a study, and asked students what they liked about how their teachers used technology, what was efficient, what was purposeful, and also questions, very targeted questions about their use of PowerPoint. And all of you here, you've been in lectures where PowerPoint was used not so inspiringly, and you know what happens then to students. So again, the notion was, how do we find out what's the easiest, most efficient, most accessible way to use the tech that students are using, and and can we spread the word about that? And Catherine was even interested in finding out, okay, are you in the classroom as teachers, are you using accessible handouts? Are you showing videos that have closed captioning for those that need it? I mean, there are a lot of issues here. There's a lot of sort of fine print detail that we went into, and that was really guided by Catherine's interest in every sense of the word. So then, of course, as the technology changed, the research changed too, and we started to look at mobile devices in the classrooms and ask students, how do you like using your mobile device in classrooms? Do you like classrooms where you get to use your mobile devices? Well, guess what they said? They said, oh yeah, we really like that a lot. And they liked it, especially when these mobile devices had a task associated with it. So what we might say now, you know, what we might do now as in Kahoot, for example, different kinds of things like that, right? So when we're talking about mobile devices, in those days, a lot of it was the tablets, but now it's almost always exclusively what you can put in your pocket with your phone. And we also looked at, how do these devices help students? Do they facilitate note-taking? Do they facilitate studying in that sense? So there was a lot of detailed information, really detailed information, that came out of the use of technologies that emerged from these studies. So these were very helpful. And that, again, translated into the FANDI database. And so we were able to share that with the world through the FANDI database and through the Adaptec Research Network website. So moving on, the use of personal technology in the class. This is, again, this is a Catherine graphic, and I wanted to include it to show you the bottom line here. What we found was that 40% of students strongly agreed that they like to use personal tech in class. And the major finding was that between 91%, you know, slightly agreed or very much agreed, fervently agreed, let's say strongly agreed, that they liked the courses when the teacher were on board with that. So if any of you are still teaching, please think about using mobile tech. I try to do it in my classes at Concordia. Of course, these findings, though, that Catherine did and were allowed to publish weren't always enthusiastically received by teachers, because not all teachers were sort of on board about that. But following that study, and there's more, this one is really important too. This one gets cited quite a bit. Catherine followed up with 175 university students and 77 stageship students, all of whom had disabilities. And most of our studies were comparing students with disabilities to the general student population. But in this case, it was just students with disabilities. And she wanted to follow up 4 years after they graduated, how they were doing, what they were doing. Did they stay with their programs? Did they graduate? Were they working in the field in which they trained for? And so the implications were, in fact, very positive. But in this, so largely they were working in the field in which they were 82% employed and working in the field that they trained for. Unfortunately, we didn't differentiate the nature of the disabilities in that study. So if that data had been disaggregated, we might have had a little bit more information. But, you know, if I were going back, if I had more time and more years of my life, that's one of the things I might go back to look into, you know. So maybe one of our youngins one day will take up the torch there. Catherine was always honest. I think she's a very honest person and very encouraging. And I am not a researcher by nature. And yet here I was working along with Catherine and Alice. And Alice told you she didn't think she was a researcher by nature either. So a few years ago, Alice and I decided that we wanted to look at the fieldwork and clinical internship experiences of students with disabilities, because we were well aware that more and more students with disabilities were accessing professional clinical programs, and we wanted to find out more about it. Catherine wasn't interested in this, and she told us, yeah, well, you want to do it, go ahead and do it. But boy, did she support us. And of course, managed with her grant writing ability, guess what? We got funded, no problem. And so so even though it wasn't a topic that was meaningful for her, she encouraged us and allowed us to do it. And her support allowed us to be able to get the grant money to do the study. It's an example of little r research, because we weren't, you know, going to be looking at huge numbers of participants, but we did a qualitative interview with about 30 people, with 3 stakeholder groups, with students with disabilities, teachers who were charged with supervising them in the clinical setting, and with accessibility advisors like Alice and myself. And we examined the barriers and facilitators in the clinical internship settings, and it allowed us to include the voices of those stakeholders. And so that was really the important piece there. And then the bottom line was we had to create deliverables. So, and a couple of our young men here were part of that in the creation of deliverables. You end up in a couple of videos that we made, but that was the whole point. So like the FANDI database, we have a toolkit now for teachers, for supervisors, for accessibility advisors, and for students that address this issue. So I'll just give you a quick, I'm worried about the time as well. What we learned from that, basically, all the bottom line is that students with disabilities and clinical internships is really more the norm now than not. There's more and more of them accessing it. And so if they're accessing learning in clinical settings, how can this be done effectively and efficiently and inclusively? The students told us that they needed support for communication and disclosure. The issue of disclosing a disability because you have special needs or you need some kind of adaptation is a very important piece. And also they wanted mentorship. They wanted role models. They wanted to hear about successful students like themselves. And they also liked the visual representation of material. That was really important. We had a colleague at Dawson, Alice and I, who decided to make little videos for his students to teach them how to do surveying. So instead of them reading about it, they'd look at their phones and listen to the teacher with the video and then go ahead and do their thing. The internship supervisors wanted clarity around policy and protocol and confidentiality regulations and guidelines and best practices, and that all made a lot of sense. And of course, the accessibility advisors also said, we need clarity around what competencies are being measured. Because one of the things when you work with in an environment where you're trying to provide service to students with disabilities and you're trying to also support teachers in their path to create an inclusive classroom is you always have to ask them, well, what's being measured? What are you really trying, what are you trying to, what is important for the student to know or to demonstrate? And so that's what we did with this. And we couldn't have done it without Catherine. Absolutely not. So moving on, she started us off and we're grateful for that. What were the unique aspects about Catherine's research with disabilities was really the involvement of stakeholders, and that Catherine recruited participants and from everywhere, from her own backyard, from across the country. They were incredible. Some of those studies with the big numbers is because she worked with people from all over, from Europe and Israel and everywhere else. She was interested in the improvement of teaching practice, and she provided a wonderful role model in the way that she mentored student researchers. I thought it was 3, and now I think it's 5, and now I think it's even more than 5 of Catherine's former students hold doctorates and are working in practicing professionals in universities and in the community. And I think that's a pretty interesting and wonderful legacy that she gave us. And Catherine got a pile of awards for her work in the college sector and with disabilities. And those are just some of them. She got the Prix de l'Arc, and that's a biggie that's awarded to in recognition of outstanding contribution to college research by the Association de, what is it? The l'Arc is AQPC. Yeah. I forget the association. I can't remember it now. Dawson recognized Catherine back in 2010 for her research and her contribution. And then the Prix Lacfa, Denise Barbeau, that was another one that recognized her research and her action. They called it action in the community. And it was a prize really just focused on the college network. And then the biggie was the Fred Straight Award. And that's from the US. And that award recognizes leadership of the recipient in fields of disability and technology. Specifically, the award acknowledged the recipient continues to work with students as an educator and as a mentor, while remaining a leader in their respective field through publication, presentations, and research. And to my mind, that sums up Catherine's legacy perfectly. Don't think there's much else I can say. If you care, of course, we're good. We studied under Catherine, so we're going to put all the references in there. And finally, from Enid and Eulalia, aka Alice and myself, thank you very much. Really very grateful for the opportunity to speak about Catherine. Thank you. Oh, and my pleasure to introduce Dr. Laura Creddy right now, who's going to talk a little more. There we go.
Hello, everyone. I'm Laura Creddy, and I go a long way too with Kathy Fitchen. I started on one side of the riverbank and ended up on the other. I first met Kathy as a professor of abnormal psychology at Dawson College. That's how far back we went. At the time, I was very uncertain about my career path, and I'd taken so many classes from different departments. And Kathy was the only professor who was just so inspirational. She loved to teach. Her exchanges with students were always respectful and kind. And it was clear that she was learning from us as much as we were learning from her. Her passion for psychology was so tangible, and she was just inspirational for me. And I pursued a career in psychology due to her. And so off I went to do my undergraduate at McGill, finished my undergraduate, and I met up with her again, actually a little bit accidentally. And she had just started thinking about research. And she was still at Dawson, and I ended up being her first research assistant. I worked with her and her dad in her living room, full of plants. It was always so warm, and of course, you know, like Alice had said, there was no lab space at the time, and that became our lab space. And, you know, she never made me feel like a student. We were collaborators. We were thinking through ideas, designing the study together, and interviews at that time with students with disabilities, with students without disabilities, with their professors, and it was just a very exciting time. And she introduced me to Eva Libman, who became my thesis advisor. She introduced me to the team at the Jewish, who grew over the years and became my second family. It's always been such a warm, welcoming, collaborative team, both for research and clinical aspects. And it didn't mean I stopped working with Kathy, because Kathy also worked at the JGH. So our collaboration just continued. And so she continued being a mentor through my master's and my PhD thesis. So my master's thesis was on sexuality and related to transurethral prostatectomy. And then, as Eva has mentioned, well, funds dried up. It was at the time, especially psychosocial research on sexuality was just not interesting. There was the introduction of Viagra, and that became the big deal in psychology. So what did we do? Well, we kept our research in the bedroom. And we started researching sleep. How did that happen? Well, again, Kathy's curiosity and her you know, constant reference to research and empirical data. And at that point, she was going through a bout of insomnia. And what did she do? Well, what does one do empirically to manage insomnia? And so she and then all of us started to read on what is insomnia? How do you treat insomnia? And we started our research on CBTI, cognitive behavior therapy, for insomnia. It was the very early years of sleep research. Conferences were like 100 people. Now it's multidisciplinary, international, thousands of people attend these conferences. So we were at its infancy. And Kathy was very much involved with my PhD thesis, which was looking at the effectiveness of different components in CBTI in older adults. And so she was constantly there helping us with research funds, with design, implementation. And so she was just always very present. Two things came from our interest in sleep. Well, one was my thesis, as I've spoken to you about, but what came out of that was we started to offer CBTI in our clinic, which was before called Sexual Dysfunction Clinic. So we had to change the name as we started offering therapy for insomnia. And it became Behavior Therapy and Research Unit because we were clinicians and researchers. As Ashley so aptly stated, our work reflected the essence of translational research, really integrating research expertise directly into clinical care. And over the course of our ongoing research, the scope was very large. We looked at sleep disorders, designed and implemented a variety of different measures to assess insomnia. We focused on concept of sleepiness, of fatigue, the importance of differentiating them and the implications of each of these we discovered and investigated the general lack of awareness and startlingly high prevalence of obstructive sleep apnea in the older population. This came about very accidentally as we were trying to do research on insomnia and tried to exclude some medical disorders. And we realized in the older population, everybody's got apnea. So we worked with that aspect of sleep in the older population. Kathy was involved in all of this research, but her expertise was especially with the development of assessment tools, with questionnaires, interviews, and as she did for the sexuality, she brought in her cognitive perspective. And a lot of articles were published along the years. And I'm just going to talk briefly about a couple that really demonstrate her particular interest in cognition. In this one, the role of thoughts during nocturnal awake times and insomnia experience, our findings supported the cognitive model of insomnia, which predicts that sleep complaints in poor sleepers are a function of negative thinking during nocturnal wakefulness, as well as of poor sleep quality. And the findings provided an empirical basis for the modification of maladaptive cognitions as important in the therapeutic intervention for insomnia. Another article that has been widely cited is The Poor Sleepers Who Do Not Complain of Insomnia, Myths and Realities about Psychological and Lifestyle Characteristics of Good and Poor Sleepers. This was one of the very few to focus on characteristics of older people who cope successfully with the ubiquitous and far-reaching problems of disrupted sleep. We very, very early on discovered there are people out there who have poor sleep but don't complain. And so this is one of the few that look at this group of people. And overall, our findings showed that the biggest differences between such individuals and those who are troubled by their sleep problems are less in the realm of what they do at night and more in the domain of how they think and feel, both during the day and during the periods of wakefulness at night. Another thing that was also accomplished was another booklet. At the time, we have to remember this was in the, must have been early 90s. There were some resources for people who have insomnia, but most of them were really big books. There wasn't a lot, and they were big books that were difficult to really access. And so a little booklet that was accessible, user-friendly, was put together for clients, and eventually we had put it on our website so anybody could download it. Short, but it had all the essential elements. And so again, this came from both Kathy and Eva's need to be helpful and really be there for clients, provide them with what they needed. And now I will pass you over to Dory Rizzo, another student from our team.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm privileged to take a moment to recognize the contributions of my late teacher and colleague, Dr. Catherine Fitchen. So Catherine was not only a respected psychologist and researcher, but also a thoughtful and rigorous mentor and collaborator. Together, we worked on this study here, and I chose this study in particular because this is where we really worked one-on-one. I went to her house. I was offered Clementine's bill. And so we worked on this study examining whether adherence to treatment for sleep apnea is associated with improvements in insomnia-related symptoms. So basically in the sleep world, this was something big because this is where we were starting to see that treating insomnia or apnea had an impact on the other. So whichever one you started with didn't really matter. But so Catherine brought to this project her deep expertise in sleep research and her strong commitment to patient-centered outcomes. And this was the really important part because it was really patient-centered. Because she went to get the qualitative data to look at the research at the research. Her insights helped shape the study's design, particularly our focus on real-world adherence and how it affects quality of sleep beyond just apnea events. So thanks to her leadership, we were able to show that consistent use of apnea therapy was modestly but significantly linked to reduced insomnia symptoms over time. So this, as I said, it's an important consideration for clinicians, especially who are dealing with patients who have sleep disorders, who often come with, comorbid sleep conditions. Catherine was driven by the goal of improving lives, and this study is just one example of her lasting impact on this field. She was thoughtful, sharp, and she cared about the science, but also about the people behind it. I learned a lot from her. I really valued working with her, and she'll definitely be missed. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Hello. It's my real pleasure today to be part of this tribute to our long-term time and beloved colleague and friend, or friend and colleague, in whatever order. I'll be talking about the last part of Kathy's research odyssey, when she brought together the two teams that oddly had not had a lot of contact, except for the students jumping over the pond to one side to the other. But the research itself was pretty distinctive. She decided to bring us together, and combining the two research areas was a pretty natural fit for Kathy because, well, first of all, she had innovated and developed such an expertise in each area. But there wasn't much research to date about like studying sleep in students of that age, or sleep, even less, sleep in students with disabilities at that time. And then if you add into the mix the fact that the pandemic had started, there's a lot of interest in, well, what is the effect of that on sleep? So, I mean, Kathy being a very observant person, as everyone has mentioned, and scientifically minded, she was aware of the impact of the lockdowns and remote learning and teaching and the social isolation on the post-secondary students and the general community. So Kathy began to consider and develop some research studies. So she led the way, and we applied for 2 grants at the FRQS, which was very successful. So the first one is about sleep quality and mental health in the post-secondary population with and without disabilities. And the second one, an interesting investigation of parasomnias, which we hadn't done before, and in post-secondary students with and without disabilities. Okay. So we got these grants, and so the two teams began to meet on Zoom because that was one gift of or possibly the only gift of the pandemic, was that it made our work lives much more flexible. And we began to meet, and it was such a pleasure to meet Susie and Alice. And in the early parts of the study, Susie was expertly running the focus groups. We'd never done focus group. Frankly, we were a little bit freaked out about them. Didn't, but she handled all that. And Alice, since that beginning, has been a steady fellow researcher and just amazing interface between our team and the number of workers and participants at the Dawson side. And then suddenly the Zoom screen became full of little windows with students in them. And these students were all, as students are, enthusiastic and talented and inquisitive, and it just made everything much more lively. So Kathy, we've all heard, it was a very productive and enthusiastic researcher. So I knew this had to contain some data. So the data I chose was to look at Kathy's CV. So in this CV was legendary for our team because it kept growing and growing, and every time in the days when you would print CVs, hers just got thicker and thicker as the years went by. And so we ourselves, the rest of the team, would use her CV to be able to update our own CVs. And whenever we were writing up something or applying for something, that was sort of the manual and the touchstone for all of it. I did a little snooping, and I looked at the publications section of her CV, and I sort of counted up how many publications she had over the years. I came up with a number of 650. And yeah, right on. Are you plotting my counting skills? No, okay. Anyway, so I just took a little, I made a graph. I think Kathy would be pleased that I made a graph. So, so I broke it down over the last 5 years, and those are the numbers that came up. I categorized them into scholarly, peer-reviewed articles, conference presentations of all kinds, talks, symposia, and posters. And the other category, which other people have referred to as the knowledge transfer aspect. Yeah. This next slide, okay, or the next two slides, I really wanted to talk about Kathy's teaching and how she integrated so many students into her research projects. So these two slides represent for the year 2024, last year, and the output for her team. The green represents the students who were participating in each of these publications. Wait a minute. These are the posters. Now you see a lot of repetition in the names. And the reason for that is that Kathy was also teaching the students how to function as a team. And so each of the student mentioned in each, but each of those citations represents the fact that they all collaborated and supported each other in their research. So, yeah. So the mentoring and the support of students was primary for her throughout. Now, considering that last year was a short year for Kathy, that I think these contributions are all the more remarkable. She was during this year ill and at times out of commission. And in those times, the Dawson team, the Dawson part of the team, made sure that the students kept going, that they got what they needed to continue. But when Kathy became back into commission, she took over again and saw to it that the research was pushed forward, that the data were collected, that the analyses were done, the papers were rolling out, and this is the result. During that time, she was particularly concerned that the students would be taken care of for the future. For example, Phoebus, who you'll meet in a moment, she wanted to know that his thesis would be completed, and it was completed a month ago. Similarly, all of yay, Phoebus. Similarly, she wanted to know that all of the students would be able to get a reference from her so that they could continue their journey in research and higher education. And she made us promise that we'd support them in getting there. The next thing is that Kathy requested that we continue her work. And we've been working steadily since to transfer the grants and the funding over to the JGH under Eva's PI-ship. I'd like to yield now to the two students who follow. First Wanan and then Phoebus. And thank you very much.
Do I hold out the mic or like this or no? Okay, I just speak here. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Huanan Liao, and I'm grateful to be able to stand here today and share a few words about Catherine, a mentor who had a profound influence on my life and academic journey as a psychology student. I remember when I first considered doing psychology research, that was in September 2023, I think. I reached out to dozens of professors, and my mind was hopeful, but at the same time filled with uncertainty. Not going to lie, the process of reaching out to professors was a little bit scary and confusing for someone who is quite introverted, I think, and had never really directly approached professors for research opportunities for doing a thesis under their realm. And after sending out many emails and receiving almost just as many rejections, Catherine's was among the very few who said yes. Although I had zero research experience at that point, she welcomed me into her teams with warmth and open arms. And thanks to Catherine, I had the amazing opportunity to meet and learn from many wonderful people, many of whom are here present at this special occasion at both the AdaptTech Research Network and the Jewish General Hospital. And she and the rest of the teams made me feel incredibly valued and supported. Under Catherine's supervision, I did my first thesis where we looked into the prevalence and psychological correlates of parasomnias among Canadian post-secondary students. And we found that parasomnia symptoms were pretty common and that psychological distress and emotional instability were quite significantly associated with how often these symptoms occurred. After finishing the thesis, Catherine also encouraged me to present this research at different poster sessions and communicate the value of scientific research to other faculty and peers. But Catherine was not just a great thesis supervisor. She's the most caring and supportive mentor any student can ask for. Catherine not only introduced me to the study of sleep, also taught me about research methods, data analysis, and academic writing. Most importantly, she inspired me through her kindness, her genuine concern for students, and as well as her relentless passion for and wholehearted dedication to research throughout her life. And even during her final weeks, she wrote a recommendation letter in support of my graduate school applications. And frankly, without her belief in me and her beautiful words, I wouldn't be preparing to start the next stage of my academic journey today. And I want to say thank you, Catherine, for your kindness, for your support, and for being such an extraordinary mentor and a great source of inspiration. And I'm forever grateful that you are my first mentor who opened my eyes to the fascinating world of psychology research, which I'll keep doing in the next couple of years. It is truly an honor to be one of your many students who are lucky and privileged enough to carry forward your legacy. Catherine, you will always be remembered and dearly missed by all of us. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yuxuan Qi, and you can also call me Phoebus. And I'm an undergrad at McGill and work as a research assistant with Catherine at AdaptTech starting September 2023. And I took part in her recent parasomnia studies as Huanan and learned a lot from her. One of the most touching memories is her dedication to research, which she continued until her last days. And another is her care for students. She truly cared about us and guided our pursuit of research in psychology. And we learned not only the knowledge and skills from her, but also her integrity, curiosity, precision, perseverance, collaboration, and humility. We had a proverb in Chinese, peach and plum trees blooming all over the world. It means that a teacher has taught many students, and these students thrive and carry her spirits to the world. I believe that Catherine has planted many wonderful trees across the world. And I have written a poem for Catherine and would like to share it with you all. Glowing, glowing night sky, displaying the supernova light. It is now distressing the sighting of radiant star, descending all the spirits to the nebula. It is exciting the rising of nascent stars, brand new journeys on the glorious path. You'll never be alone on this quest. We all share the blood inside of us. The pursuit will never rest while the torch is ever passed. Free your sight to the deepest sky. On thy side, our best wishes shall fly. And I would like to share some of the context of the poem. It's obvious I major in psychology. I really love psychology. And I also finished my thesis with Catherine, Sally, Eva, and Laura, and with help of Alice and Susie, and also my friends Juana. And besides psychology, I'm also interested in astronomy, as Catherine loved the science fiction of astronomy. And I took an elective course this year at McGill, and I learned the evolution of universe and galaxy. And then I found the evolution of universe and galaxy is really a perfect analogy of scientific research relaying. And the universe starts with several giant stars, and these giant stars are giant and brilliant. They spend their lives burning and create new things, new elements. And at the end of their lives, there will be a supernova explosion and they will light up the entire galaxy. And then all of the materials from these stars will send to the galaxy. And these materials are where new generation of stars are formed. And the new generation of stars will use the materials, spirits, and burning their lives to create new things, new elements, and then explode and pass it to the next generation. I think this generation by generation of stars are just like the scientific research, the researchers relating. And Catherine are like those pioneering stars. She had a brilliant work, studies, and marvelous findings, and she will pass this knowledge and skills and also her virtues to the students, and like us, like also Laura, like and us students will carry on her knowledge, skills, and have our own experiments, findings, and we will also pass it to the next generation. And this generation by generation of researchers, clinical psychologists will make the pursuit of science unstoppable. And I think that that is what I learned from Catherine, the science of life and the life of science. Thank you.
That was very wonderful. Thank you. I just wanted to let you know there are 2 more slides to go before we finish. So this kind of represents Kathy's dissemination as well as supernovas and stars and things. We also have sailboats. And finally wanted to like end on this note. Kathy is obviously very happy and in her element. Thank you very much.